Frankly, I had the same concerns when I was director of the CIA about the approach that we had to take in dealing with Qatar. I was never quite sure where their allegiance was. I thought, frankly, that they could not be trusted. I still would urge that we be very careful with them, because the problem is, in the end, I'm not sure you can trust their word.
קטאר מסתבעה בגופים רשמיים כמו האו"ם.
The Qataris have spent an enormous amount of money on college campuses. They've spent an enormous amount of money influencing governments around the world. They have spent an enormous amount of money in media, in lobbyists, in public relations. I don't think there's any other country or entity that has spent this much on one issue.
وإيرادات التضامن مع سكان غزة صامدين الذين فتكت لهم قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي دون أي اعتبار القانون الدولي.
If you're trying to understand Qatar, you have to understand the Sheikha. She is really the individual who's behind all the hatred. She sees herself as the driving force to remove Jews from the Middle East. And that driving force is what ends up making Qatar more dangerous than any other enemy Israel may have right now.
Sheikha Moza, she's the daughter of the leader of Qatari opposition in that time, Nasser bin Abdullah al-Musnad, from al-Muhannadi tribe, my tribe.
אופוזיציונר מאוד בולט. מחלוקת.
She was a young lady, 18 years old. She married from Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa as a second wife.
כשהיא מתחתנת עם חמד.
She's very well educated, so she was aware of things that Sheikh Hamad was not aware of.
וכך בעצם נסללת חשיבותה.
The same channel Al Jazeera, which was supposed to be the gateway between the West and the Arab world, converted radically to be the official media of terrorism.
קטאר מעולם הלאומיים שלה.
1999, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden was only to be seen in that channel.
Al Jazeera somehow knows exactly where all the attacks are going to take place in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They know where to put their people to cover the worst violence carried out by many of the same groups that have found a home in Qatar. This television station becomes Jihad TV.
וגם בעידן.
There is no way for Qatar to ever become a superpower. It has no army. It can only buy influence. And it can buy a lot. They control something like 12% of the world's energy. And they only have 330,000 people, so they can spend money all over the world to buy influence and to buy power. I believe that they asked the United States to establish a base in Qatar because they don't have an air force. America is their air force. And at the same time, we become increasingly aware of the fact that there are Hamas figures and Al-Qaeda figures and other bad actors that have found a home in Qatar. Very irregular for the United States. George W. Bush said either you're with us or you're against us. Somehow, the Qataris didn't have to choose.
אנחנו מתחילים לגלות את זה, דיוויד כהן, שהוא הירוק. They gave $1 billion to Hezbollah in Iraq. They helped fund Qasem Soleimani. They gave money to Jabhat al-Nusra. They had this idea of regional jihad, their regional proxy power. And if you look at their battle against Israel, they tried to influence Israel's enemies at Israel's doorstep.
قلت على أيدي المؤمنين. Sheikh Moza had a direct relationship with Al-Qaradawi. She was influencing Al-Qaradawi on what to say in the mosques, for example.
הקימה לו את אתר באסלאם.
When Israel left Gaza 2005, Hamas won the election. They start killing their rebels, which is Fatah. Hamas started taking money from Qatar since 2006.
האמירות המוסלמית They become the first country to recognize Hamasistan. the Hamas government in Gaza.
גם עשור אחרי, בתור סוג של משהו חשוב, כלי תקשורת קטרים יראו את הצילומים של האמיר ושייח' חמוזה מבקרים בעזה.
במקביל הם טענו את כל הדבר הזה.
After that, it becomes more complicated.
ממונים צבאיים, והשייח' חמוזה הזרימה לשם כספים ואפשרה את כל הדבר הזה.
After that, it becomes more complicated. You see the eruption of the Arab Spring. And here, the influence of Qatar can be seen everywhere. Every one of the Muslim Brotherhood revolutionary movements that comes out in protest against the existing government, Egypt and Tunisia and Syria and Yemen and Libya, Qatar is behind all of it. In Libya, when the Gaddafi regime falls, you see the raising of the Qatari flag over Tripoli. This was the moment that I realized that Qatar had become something else.
The Arab Spring was when Qatar had its cotillion. It's when it had its coming out party for the rest of the Middle East. They started putting money behind guns, money behind bribery, money behind ammunition.
You begin to see U.S. Treasury officials come out and speak openly about Qatar support for terrorism. It becomes very clear that it's a problem, but not a problem that anybody is willing to take any action to stop.
שנת 2000 זה מאוד מקורבים.
Sheikh Hamoza could influence Tamim bin Hamad to do anything she wanted. She controlled the narrative of what's happening in Qatar, the way her son has to act. So that's the power she has and the influence she has in the country.
בעשור הראשון לשלטון.
רוצה לשמוע, זה יהיה מונדיאל ירוק, האצטדיונים יהיו מודולריים, אנחנו נפרק אותם ונתרום אותם למדינות נזקקות. מי שקידם את זה שקטר תהיה זאת שמערכת את המונדיאל, הייתה לו אחרת מאשר השייח' חמוזה.
The Qataris engaged in unbelievably horrible human rights violations. They brought in all these foreign workers, and the foreign workers were dying as they were building these stadiums in brutal 120-degree heat, and nobody said a thing. It was too big to fail, and there were too many people that were invested.
קטר השתמשה
The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Egyptians, they all came out and declared that Qatar was a malign actor in the region.
Six Arab countries went to Washington. Six Arab countries went to Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2017 and eventually were able to convince the president that the Qataris were not doing their fair share in combating terrorism.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level.
לקטרים קשה, מדובר אלטרנטיבה.
What solution do the Qataris come up with to push back against the Saudis and the Emiratis? None other than American Jewish community influencers. The influence of the Jewish communal infrastructure that exists in the United States is the envy of the Sheikh. What the Qataris do is they say, how much will it cost me to have this kind of relationship? And then they buy it.
לאורך שנים, started to invite them in Doha, giving them some money to post certain videos and giving them some lavish lifestyle for a short period.
And these are not left-wing organizations. These are the vanguard of the Jewish conservative right that they are bringing to Doha to try to sell them the Qatari dream, which in the end of the day leads to a very, very definable policy goal.
H.R. 2712, the Palestinian International Terrorism Support Prevention Act of 2017.
In 2017 and 2018, there was a piece of legislation called the Hamas Accountability Act, which would have labeled countries that had hosted Hamas bases as state sponsors of terrorism. What did the Qataris do? After they hosted American Jewish community leaders, scions of the American Jewish community out of American Zionism, they took pictures from those trips, the handshakes between American Jewish community leaders and the Sheikh, and they started shopping it around to members of Congress to say, why would you support a bill which is against Qatari interests, which would make it harder for Qatar to fight terrorism when leaders of the American Jewish community are visiting our capital? It was a perfect play. Qatar, this could have led to the collapse of Hamas's financial support from the government of Qatar. But from the government of Qatar, but the Qataris killed it.
Around 2018, the Qataris raised their hands and said, "We will help keep Gaza quiet." The planning that was required for the October 7th attacks took years. The training, the movement of people, the movement of cash. I think Qatar knew exactly what was going on. It kept things quiet. It kept money coming in. These were years that, if you ask me, Qatar helped to buy. It built the tunnel metro that Israel is still trying to destroy. It funded the army that waged the war against Israel. And the Qataris did that all while telling Israel, "We're here to help."
They entered with their own cameras, protection system, and they had the campaign ready and started immediately after the attack. Al Jazeera was ready, was prepared.
The time has come to draw the line for the enemy to understand their time is up.
There is certain information and intelligence information I have as well mentioned to me very clearly that Qatar knew about the attack.
And you see Hamas senior leadership praying in the Doha Sheraton and celebrating the attacks. The Israelis were fooled in a 10-year strategic game by Hamas, but it was sponsored and planned and paid for by the Qatari government.
אחת הטעויות שאנחנו יודעים שהקטרים עומדים מאחורי, בין השאר מאחורי 7 באוקטובר. מה קורה פה?
משרד החוץ הקטרי טוען שהאחראית העיקרית למה שקרה ב7 באוקטובר, חמוזה חותמת על ההצהרה הזאת לחלוטין, מבחינת שהאחראית העיקרית למה שקרה ב7 באוקטובר היא ישראל. שחמוזה חותמת על ההצהרה הזאת לחלוטין, מבחינת שחמוזה, ישראל היא גורם עוין, ובישראל צריך לפגוע.
The day that Yahya Sinwar was killed, Sheikh Hamoza posted, the day that Yahya Sinwar was killed, Sheikh Hamoza posted a tribute to Yahya Sinwar, essentially saying that his memory would live on forever. This should give you a sense of the priorities of the regime.
ولا أقصد هنا أن يرتكبون جرائم ويقتلوا الأطفال والنساء فحسب، بل كل من دعم هذا العدوان الغاشم بالمال والعتاد ونختار الصمت أو التفاهم.
The way I like to explain it is that the Qataris are the arsonists and the firefighters. They have set the entire region on fire, and then they come to the United States and say, "We'll negotiate with them for you, on your behalf." Except I don't think they're negotiating on our behalf. I think they're keeping their clients safe and funded.
Because they have relationships with groups like Hamas, because they continue to support them, and at the same time reach out to establish relationships with the Trump administration, it's hard to know where their loyalties are. Based on my experience with them and the intelligence that we received on how they operate, best advice I would give is be very careful about what they promise and what they're delivering.
והקטרים מבינים את זה היטב.
Qatar renting loyalties. You could be an influential person that worked for someone else. They come with something beyond your expectations. For example, you are earning $100,000 a year. They come to you, they said, okay, we give you $1 million for you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they give you a 10-year salary from now. Of course you were going to think about it.
אני עובד במכון מחקר שנקרא FDD, אחד.
There's somebody they're trying to influence, whether it's Netanyahu or whether it's Donald Trump. They will use ways to try to get into the favor of these individuals. Whether it's gifts, whether it's money, whether it's some kind of personal relationships, who knows? They're good at that.
The Qataris don't have to overturn governments. They buy those who are responsible, who are bringing them to power in the first place. There are members of the Trump administration at this point who are serving, who were former registered foreign agents of the Qatari government prior to them coming back into office. So the Qataris don't have to overthrow governments. They pick who's going to be in government, sponsor them, and eventually they become their actors when they get in office.
העובדה שככה
הכספים הישראלים את הנהגת החמאס.
When Israel attacked Doha, I think the Qataris understood that they were potentially in trouble, even with the United States being based in Qatar, because the United States didn't stop the bomb from coming in. It was a moment, I think, where the Qataris realized how vulnerable they were. And in that moment, I think the Qataris were willing to trade Hamas for their own security.
זמן קצר אחר.
לעצור את הלחימה.
Qatar is going to be investing much more than $1 trillion in the United States. You know, we set a record. There's never been anything like it. No country in history has had that kind of investment.
End up investing in reconstruction. The Saudis and the Emiratis are saying very clearly, we will only invest in reconstruction if Hamas is disarmed. And the reason they're doing it is because saying, if they're not and they reconstitute themselves, they'll do this again. Qatar is not conditioning its reconstruction assistance.
It must be the policy of the Israeli government to not allow Turkey and Qatar to have any mechanism, any ounce, any gram of influence in the Gaza Strip. What happened on October 7th was because of Qatari influence. And if the Israeli government and the security establishment repeats the mistakes that led to October 7th, you'll be looking at another event just like that.